Good morning and welcome to our event, Mutual Accommodation, a virtual seminar in the publication of William A. Macdonald's Might Nature Be Canadian? Essays on Mutual Accommodation event. This is a book published by McGill Queen's Press, and the seminar is sponsored by Trent University and the Bill Graham Center for Contemporary International History. I'm Heather Nicol, the director of the School for Study of Canada at Trent, and I'd like to say we're delighted to have you here today. Before we get started, I just want to give you a little bit of context about why we're here and how this event came to be. This is a celebration and a discussion of a book project. It's an important one, and it's been a few years in the making. It began not only with the insightful essays of Bill Macdonald's, the insightful essays he wrote for the Globe and Mail over a number of years, but also with Bill's efforts to initiate a broader conversation about the future of Canada. Bill's work to promote dialogue about Canada's political, economic, social, and cultural strengths and weaknesses led to the Canadian Difference Project, which is where in 2016 I became involved with Chris Dummett, Moman Rahman, and a number of other Trent scholars. And we're really promoting an initiative and taking the idea of discussion around accommodation to a broader online community. And we can discuss more about that later if we have questions there. But while the online discussion is over now, the capstone piece of this Canadian Difference Project was always to be the publication of a book supporting the vision. And this is what we're discussing and celebrating today, the release of Bill's book by McGill Queen's Press, Might Nature Be Canadian? It's quite an accomplishment to write a book, let alone one over 300 pages in length that's engaging and thought-provoking. And that's exactly what Bill has done. And this is why we're here today, not to provide a book review and to repeat passages from the text within Bill's book, but rather to reflect on the broad picture that Bill painted and ask ourselves how we see these same issues. We've asked participants, and we have panels of eminent Canadians speaking today, and as well as international participants. We've asked them to use Bill's book as a platform for their own thoughts and reactions about this Canadian project. In other words, we want to have a conversation. But before turning events over to the Honorable Bill Graham, who'll moderate the first panel, I want to do two things. I want to thank Bill Macdonald and all our speakers, without whom this event would not be possible. And I want to thank others as well. I want to thank McGill Queen's Press for their excellent work in producing the book, for Daria Dambazi and Jack Cunningham, for Stacey Belair, Adam Bell, and Pamela McGregor, and of course, John English, who worked tirelessly to put this event together with us. So thank you so much for being here. I'm now going to introduce the Honorable Bill Graham, and he is going to introduce us to the first panel.
Well, thank you very much, Heather, for that introduction. And it's really a privilege for me to join you and others here to celebrate the publication of our friend Bill Macdonald's book, elaborating his view on mutual accommodation, an idea which is obviously central to our efforts to try and deal with so many of the problems that beset us in the modern world. I have the privilege of chairing the opening panel, which is comprised of two eminent commentators, Martin Wolf, who will be joining us from the United Kingdom, and Tom Mulcair. So without any further comments, Martin, I wonder if I could ask you to take it over, and we look forward to your comments. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me. First of all, it's a great honor and pleasure to participate in this event in honor of Bill. So what I'm going to do in the very short amount of time I have is to use the idea of mutual accommodation, which seems to me a very valuable and important one, as a lens, a way of thinking about where we are in the world today. I'm going to start by making what seems to me the most obvious point if you're looking at the world from the point of view of a convinced liberal Democrat. that we are in a really bad way. So what are some of the elements of this, I'm writing a book myself, which is called The Crisis of Democratic Capitalism. What is this crisis? Well, first, we've had in the West an immensely difficult period since 2007. We had a huge financial crisis, which was a tremendous shock to our political systems and to confidence in ourselves and of the world in us. And the recovery was never really very strong. We lost an enormous amount of output relative to trend and suffered a great deal of fiscal austerity in many countries. And then not long after, really, extraordinarily short period, we're hit by the COVID-19 crisis. Second, we have what really is an assault on quite important fundamental norms of the rule of law and of democratic values in core Western countries. And I think here particularly of the US and the UK. Third, we have extraordinary pressure on the Western alliance, really something close to a disintegration of the Western alliance, which is associated with the rise of nationalism as a very powerful force in politics, not just in the West, but of course in the world. Fourth, and I think very significantly, the financial crisis demonstrated to the world that core Western countries weren't really very good at managing capitalism. The COVID-19 crisis has demonstrated that core Western countries are not very good at managing pandemics either. And the rest of the world has noticed the contrast between the death rates in core East Asian countries, China notably, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, on the one hand, and the Western countries is stark and horrifying. And finally, in this story of woe, we have, or we are really already well advanced in what is becoming a very serious breakdown in international relations with a rising superpower of China. So this is an incredibly challenging world for us and for us in the world. That leads me then to my second major question, is why has this happened? And I have come to the view, very well expressed in a recent book by my friends Michael Pettis and Matt Klein, that external failures of this kind are very closely linked to domestic ones. And the most important failures are internal. And they are, putting it very crudely, the failures in Macdonald's terms, the failure of winners in our society to accommodate the interests of the losers in our society. The losers both culturally and economically. And the result of that has been, one of the aspects of that is that a very large part of our society has been, as it were, culturally and politically atomized. They're no longer part of active civil society relationships. Organizations like trades unions, friendly societies, and so forth have been enormously weakened. And I think they have become atomized. Atomized people become desperate people. And this has allowed them to be the prey of demagogues. And again, this is seen across the West. Now, if we look at our politics, if I'm right in this, we have two relatively organized groups, relatively coherent and relatively assertive. Interestingly, and to me surprisingly, The person who identified this most clearly was Thomas Piketty, and to put his view very crudely, essentially we have a conflict for power between what might call the plutocracy and the Brahmins. And they are competing for the loyalty of everybody else. And it's pretty clear who the plutocrats are and how they dominate politics. And it's pretty clear who the Brahmins are. They're basically the people who run university institutions, run news media at a high end. And they have very different goals. And they are both trying to seek the loyalty of the rest of our atomized society. And the right-wing side of this, the plutocrats allied with the right, are going for, or found it convenient to exploit nationalism as a core driver of their search for power. And we can see this very clearly with Mr. Trump and Mr. Johnson. And these drivers of domestic politics lead very clearly to very assertive, very nationalist, and very non-accommodationist policies globally. So I think the global failures of accommodation, which I'm going to come to now, and then I'm going to get to the end, reflect in large part our domestic failures of accommodation. Well, one aspect of this, I thought I should put in a little macroeconomics since Bill likes it, which Pettis Klein talk about, is that we, in not compensating the losers, we generated most of our society's very large increases in income inequality, and that tended to increase savings gluts almost everywhere, drove down real interest rates, and forced central banks into hyper-accommodating monetary policy over a very long period. So I see the domestic failures of accommodation also in our macro problems. But we can see it very, very clearly, too, in the breakdown of international relations. Within the West, nationalism just doesn't go with Western cooperation, and you can see this across the board. And of course, between the West and China. We are seeing the breakdown of international systems, of discipline and accommodation, most notably trade, and we're seeing the rise of nationalist stupidity. Now, my very last point is we are seeing this sort of world emerge, in my view, when it has never been more important to achieve global accommodation and global order. We have, as a species, reached a scale in terms of our influence upon the world, which is unprecedented. We are transforming our environment. We have the capacity, completely transforming our environment, and finding it very difficult to do anything effectively about it. We have, of course, the capacity to blow ourselves up, and the number of nuclear powers has been steadily increasing and will, I suspect, increase further. And of course, we have the challenge of achieving and sustaining economic stability, which is so important for all our peoples. And we're finding it very, very difficult to do so. We've had two of the most profound slumps in all of history in the last 15 years. So the question is, my very last question, is it still possible to achieve a resolution of our global stresses, which are based on mutual accommodation but of difference at the global level? I won't talk about the domestic level, I don't have time. We have first, what are the three things we have to do to achieve this? We have to accept the reality of the very profound cultural, even civilizational differences between the powers that are now emerging in the world, and particularly between the West and especially the US on the one hand and China on the other. we have to work out a way of demarcating and defining areas of dominant interest of the two sides, geographically above all, but also in other respects. And finally, we have to define codes and rules and institutions which monitor and to some extent police the boundaries of unacceptable behavior and impose penalties for transgressions. In other words, we have to work out a way of living together with one another, probably unhappily, but at least not catastrophically. And it seems to me, in conclusion, that we are living now at a time in which if we don't achieve this, things could go very, very badly wrong and quite soon. Thank you.